Then without further ado, let's talk a little bit about data management planning. I already mentioned this morning that data management planning should hopefully be the very first step in any scientific undertaking. So planning your work out, that's usually what happens. Now the question is that we all get into the habit of not only planning what kind of analysis we want to do, what kind of data we need to collect for that, but also how we want to deal with the data and who's going to be responsible for what kind of resources do we need. That means the data management planning should be one of the very first activities involved in the whole research data management cycle or process. And then the best thing is to write, of course, a brief plan, and the data management plan should help you design and plan how you're dealing with the data, not only with the science. Who does the planning? So basically, data producers and data reusers, anybody who's integrating data, anybody who's producing data for the project can participate in our experience supporting people in preparing good data management plans. There's usually one person specifically charged with that topic. It's either the PI or a leading PI or the person who's supposed to know most about data management in general. So it can be a different role in the project. How to do the planning? First, you start, of course, with your research question that you already have in mind. And then you start thinking about the different stations of the data lifecycle that we also saw this morning. So what are you going to collect or generate or just generally produce? Then the methods, and if and when and how you're going to link this to other people's data. That also comes into the plan. Then you have to check any kind of existing data management recommendations, guidelines, or requirements. So we also mentioned this morning, so repetition makes maybe for learning, is the guidelines for handling research data of the DFG, the guidelines for handling research data in biodiversity research, and also the good scientific practice. But that's only from the funding side. Of course, you have to keep in mind anything coming from your institution in addition to that as well. So what is a data management plan? What should be in a data management plan? So optimally, a data management plan should be a formal document outlining what you do with your data during and after your project, right? A good DMP should include as much information as possible on the data acquisition. So where is the data going to come from? How you're going to do the quality assurance, how you're going to do the intermediate handling and the storage, so preservation. Then the long-term archiving, the analysis, and the publication, including is it going to be open access? If not, why not? Which parts and what kind of licenses you're going to attach to your data. So I'm not going to go into detail about the licenses. You're hopefully going to get a very good introduction to this by my colleague Uwe Schindler, who does a great job on this. Then you should consider the costs of doing good research data management. Because that's the good data management doesn't happen by itself and doesn't happen on the side. That's actually just putting extra pressure on someone that might not even be, let's say, trained for this kind of work. And please note that generally the funding agencies, at least the DFG, you can apply for funding to the DFG in addition to your research budget and personnel budget for data management. The same way that you can apply for a budget for publishing costs for journal articles, right? So if you plan in advance, example, and you know you want to publish your data, you create a DMP, either you know your way around or you come knocking at our door and ask, okay, how do I do with the DMP? What about the publishing costs? You mentioned something in this seminar. So most of the data repositories we work with offer the archiving and the publishing for free. up to a certain size limit. So just because of the way how everything is financed in the German scientific system, there may be, let's say, a certain huge amount of data that a certain repository cannot just take without any kind of additional payment. But if you do your homework correctly and you create a data management plan and you contact them in advance, then you say, this is what we're planning to archive with you. Is this going to cost anything? Yes. What is it going to cost? 200 euro, 500 euro. Okay, I'm going to apply for these costs with the DFG, and I don't have to cut it from my other publishing budget or whatever else, right? So this is generally possible. And then the benefits, one of the benefits that personally I don't believe is used very much at the moment, at least not across the board, is that a DMP should be a living document. So not only official document that maybe you would consider publishing on Zenodo, as I said before, but it should be a living document. So in the best case scenario, whoever is responsible for the data in a specific project would take the time every 6 months, maybe, to have a look at the data management plan, see what's happening in the project, and decide, is this plan still going to work? Is this still current or not? Do we need to adapt the data management plan? So we said we're going to publish the data beforehand, before we analyze. This is somehow not happening. We need to revise this. So basically, you should be coming back to your data management plan and adapting it and maybe putting out new versions of it, and not just say, okay, it's a PDF, I submitted the grant, I got the grant, let's forget about a data management plan. That's the best case scenario. But at the moment, it's up to you to decide whether you're doing this like that or not. The reason why we recommend this is good data publication, at least, often requires some preparation and good planning. Example, the Pangea publisher for Earth and Environmental Science, which is part of a network of international publishers for Earth and Environmental Science, which acronym I just forgot in that immediate second. So they have a curation process that is not automated. So there are curators sitting there, and because they have so many submissions, they clearly state there is a waiting time anywhere between 3 and 6 weeks until your submission can be processed and you can get your DOI. So the sooner you start this process, the better. And how do you start the process sooner? How do you help the process proceed at a faster pace? It's by good preparation, which means good planning beforehand. And this ties to the advantages that I think I mentioned already this morning. It saves you time in the long run. It saves you also from some last minute pressure. So please do not start publishing your data the day before you want to send your journal article for review. That's never going to work properly. It'll just generally make your life easier if you plan on how you handle your data with a DMP. And it increases the transparency of your work. It's becoming a funding agency requirement. Again, I'll double check with Jimena at least what is exactly the current state with the DFG. As far as I know, it's highly recommended. It's not a full-on requirement at the moment, but I might be wrong on this. Again, I'll double check and let you guys know by the end of the week. But generally speaking, proposals can be rejected if you cannot portray that you know how you're dealing with your data. Now, let's get a little bit of details on this. So what we're portraying here is the way that we deal with DMPs for the biodiversity domain. Where is this coming from? Generally is a questionnaire that has been put out by the DFG on how to handle, so basically the requirements for handling biodiversity data. So I'm pretty sure that on the DFG's website somewhere there is a Word document that has all these questions in some form. We have portrayed it here as a couple of slides, and no matter when and where you get the practical, I will show you a little bit of how we deal practically with these DMPs as a service before we end the session today. So this is tailored towards biodiversity research. However, a lot of the parts that are in there are generic and are applicable to almost any other domain or subdomain of the biological sciences. And there are, let's say, already sub-projects working on figuring out what is the least common or the maximum common denominator between DMP questions and contents across the discipline. So this is work happening within the wider network of the NFDIs, saying it doesn't matter if you come from engineering, social sciences, biodiversity, some of these questions will always be the same and contain the same options. So let's try to find that common denominator. Okay, back to the details. So you always have to start with basic information about your project. So whoever reads your DMP needs to understand a little bit about the background. So you don't have to tie in your whole proposal, but at least the abstract. So what is the title? Who's involved? Who to contact about the data, and where is the money coming from? Then the description of the project. What is the object? What are you trying to study? What do you want to find out? How do you want to find it out? So which kind of data types are you going to be producing? And maybe some general information about the classification or the topic. Then, as mentioned before, the relevant policies and guidelines. These can range from again, from institutional policies and guidelines, DFG, or other funding agencies. And you need to be aware of them and follow them, but they should be listed in the DMP as well. General information about the data collection or the handling, so the using of the IDs, documentation of processing step. Important point, which I think people stumble upon when they first start writing DMPs, is metadata description and standards. So this is a point that hurts a lot if you haven't used metadata standards checklists before, and this is the first time you're faced with this. A lot of people stumble over this, and then they write to us and say, okay, what are we dealing with here? So, but this is a good point because it's early enough to help people think about which metadata standards should they be using. I mentioned some this morning, so Dublin Core, Darwin Core, ABCD, the mixes for molecular sequence data, the EML, ecological metadata language, and whatever else might be relevant to your subdiscipline. Also, I would tie in here also the terminologies or ontologies, if there are some that you might want to use to describe your data. That also helps to think about in advance. Last but not least, data types and formats. Again, as I mentioned this morning, the general recommendation is try to stay with open formats as much as possible. So making you think about this in advance should help in that direction. Then comes the data volume, number of data sets, number of data types, whatever. It sounds very trivial to you right now. I can tell you that total data volume is still not an issue to neglect completely. So as a bioinformatician, I come from a time where people applied for a grant for doing genomics. And because it was the high time of development of different sequencing techniques. And between the application for the project and the time you got the money and you got your samples and were ready for sequencing, the price for sequencing would have dropped by a factor of 10 at least, if not 100. And suddenly you could get 10 to 100 times more data for the same amount of money. And people were, of course, very happy about this. What they often forgot to consider is, if you have 100 times more data, do I have the crunching power, the compute power to actually deal with this? And then they will come to us and say, how can we process this with the current server power that we have in the institute? So back then I was still working with the Max Planck Institute in Bremen. And so this should not be neglected still, even though infrastructure has become more robust and a little bit bigger, and you can get cloud resources in different locations, but still getting cloud resources might be tied to something like writing a small project proposal to the cloud administration, whichever one it is, finding someone that can support you, get the compute there, getting the data over, depending on how big it is. So this can also put in a couple of weeks of effort, extra effort that you haven't Without a DMP, you might just stumble upon. With a DMP, hopefully not. Data exchange between partners. Yes, I know if your data set is anywhere below the 10 gigabyte, nobody cares about it anymore. Everybody has an own cloud or a Nextcloud instance at their institute. People still use their private Dropboxes and Google Drives, which generally you shouldn't do for work purposes, unless there's an explicit contract with that company by your institution, which I doubt in most cases. So think about if you're exchanging data with partners outside of your institution, how are you going to do that? And of course, backup and storage during the data project. The best thing you can do is you have the resources in one of your partner institutions. They have a good IT infrastructure, maybe even a support, a bioinformatician or something like this. But make sure to clarify this because I understand. So we also talk to IT staff a lot, also in institutions that do research. And generally speaking, IT staff is very eager to help. But, and I have complete understanding for this, if you go and talk to them in advance, what your needs in 6 months or 1 year might be, they'll be very eager to help. If you go to them and say, look, I got this 50 terabyte of data, so where can I store it? Why don't you have this? I need it yesterday. That's of course a slightly different setting, and then they might react in a completely different way, which again, from my perspective, is understandable. One of my favorite topics, archiving, publication, and licensing. So, well, where will data be archived? And with archive, this is again meant long term. And long term is anything, the absolute minimum is 10 years, as I mentioned this morning. So, hopefully, the days are gone where each individual project would buy a cheap server and install an FTP server on it and say, here's our data, and we're going to keep the server running after the project ends. That's people used to do this maybe 10, 15 years ago. That's not state of the art anymore. So please don't do that ever from now on, latest after today. And there are very good long-term archives or long-term repositories within Germany, outside of Germany, topic-specific, discipline-specific, data-specific, that are specialized in preserving your data long-term, that are specialized in curating at least the basic metadata. So this is where the data generally should go. They also have a mandate to keep the data. They have generally also the funding to do this. So this is how you archive the data long term. And I believe almost all of them have also the capacity and the workflows to publish your data in the proper way. So that it gets a DOI, it's visible not only on their website or on their portal, but also in other portals, be it the GFBio data search, be it GBIF, be it Google data search or whatnot. In this slide deck, this is still posed as a question. Do you need a persistent identifier? I would talk to my colleagues that we strike the question mark and put an exclamation mark and say you need a persistent identifier. So latest, by the time you read the FAIR guiding principles, you'll see there is no findability of data without a persistent identifier. So why even question it? Licenses, as I said, you need to be clear on the licenses and what they mean. The details you'll get from Uwe Schindler. But just in one sentence, why are we talking about licenses so much? The license is the piece of information that when you want to reuse other people's data or other people want to reuse your data, the license is the piece of information that tells them, what am I allowed to do under what conditions with this data? Am I allowed to use this? The same as with any image you find on the internet, you think this is cool, I want to use this for my presentation. If it doesn't have a license, keep your hands off it. You don't know how it is licensed. You don't know if and how you're allowed to use it. If it has a license, you can please read that. You can ask for that information. You can figure it out. Same thing applies for data as well. Is there an exclusive use of the data needed? So this is, again, pointing to the fact that Some parts of the data can maybe or should remain closed or closed access or restricted access even after the publication of the rest. Remember, rare species, for example, we shouldn't disclose the location to just anyone. But on the other hand, also the concept of embargoes, basically saying if I want to deposit the data in the repository because I know that this takes time, so I'm going to do it early on. But I'm still a little bit afraid of scooping, so I want to have another 6 months before the data becomes public so I can finish my manuscript. This is again ties into the exclusive rights of the data. And you might see this later this week. So there are repositories like Pangea. So I don't work for them. I don't get any credits or chocolate or whatever that I cite them so often. I just think that some of the things they do very well, is to say metadata goes public immediately. So anybody can see that there is this study that something was measured somewhere in the Atlantic, for example, but the actual data points are still under embargo. And if you want to get early access to the data, you can contact the person who to whom the data belongs and figure out if they want to give you early access or not. And with Pangea, for example, also you can generate a private preview or reviewer link for your data. So if you're submitting your article and your data is still not public, at least the reviewers can double check and make sure that your data is deposited in a good public repository. Not all repositories offer this. It's often very difficult. We have these chats with the ENA, with the European Nucleotide Archive. They don't offer this, and but we're still in discussion how this can be made possible in the near future. And of course, what we do with sensitive data. So we've had some very nice collaborations with qualitative social sciences. So biodiversity and social science tying together. This is actually pretty amazing because if you go to biodiversity rich environments, this morning we mentioned South America, but not only there. When you try to study the biodiversity, it's really not enough to just make a one-time observation or try to make a time series of a couple of times a year. It's really important to talk to the local people. It's true everywhere because they've been there for generations. They know how things have changed in the last years. They know why some things occur or doesn't occur at a certain time. And basically talking to these people creates a completely different type of data. And that is governed by maybe completely different set of principles, ethical and legal compliances. And this needs to be taken into account. But by now, we also have a little bit of experience with this, and we collaborate very strongly with the NFDI for social sciences, consort SVD, and also with one of the data services, Quali Service, it's called, that's also partially based in Bremen and supported by Pangea. So we've done a couple of DMPs also for mixed types projects, biodiversity and social data. Yeah, you estimate, so the DMP should help you estimate the costs of publishing. That means, so we have to distinguish a little bit. If you write a DMP completely on your own, you might not know if there are any costs and what these costs will be. If you figure out where your data should go, you can contact these data repositories and data publishers on your own and just ask them. From the example, if it's several terabytes, okay, do you guys need any kind of, so is this going to cost me anything? And if it's going to cost me anything, what is it going to cost me? So all of the inputs from before might tie into these costs, because depending on which domain, subdomain you're coming from, which projects, even which funding program you're from, it might be that the certain repositories have some kind of collaboration or even a contract that says they have to take certain types of data no matter what size it is. So communication is key. And when we're finishing, then I'm just going to show you how we do this as a service in a couple of minutes. So maybe if you're in a pinch or if you start this from the first time, you can get a little bit of help from us. Let me see. Is that the last slide? Okay, that's almost the last slide. But to answer the question from the chat about the costs, it will always depend on the repository and their financing mechanisms. The one that I can speak about at the moment, so the molecular sequence databases that have an international collaboration, the INSDC, those are for free regardless of the size, so they'll never ask you for any kind of financing. For Pangea, I know that as far as I know, but again, you have to talk to them directly. After a certain size, I believe they will charge you, but they will charge you a one-time charge, not, let's say, per 10 years. So let's say, okay, we're going to save it for 10 years at least, and this is the charge per year. So we have to write you an invoice each and every single year. There are also some general purpose archives, like Zenodo is for free, for example, yes. I don't know what the size limits will be there, if that's even relevant. And I know that Radar has another pricing model, but again, it's a very general purpose repository. So I have to say at this point, please be as specific as possible with selecting your data repositories, unless you're asking for a quick DMP review with us. So don't put just everything in Zenodo, Dryad, or another general purpose repository simply because it goes fast and it's very easy. Nobody asks you for any metadata or metadata standards. That's not the way to go. But we don't have today we don't have the time to go into this data publication story. I think this is coming to you as a topic on the last 2 days, if I remember the schedule correctly. I hope that answers the question from the chat. If not, we can circle back to it in a minute. So this is just a checklist if you want to use afterwards, and then we're down to the take-home messages. So the data management plan, a formal document, hopefully a living document that you revisit and recheck if you're still on track. And again, starts with small steps, integrating small parts into your routine. So metadata, data, getting in contact with people that might need to help you, and do the DMP as early as possible. My recommendation is, even if you don't have you're not applying for a funding project, write your first DMP for your current project, even if it's already running, as an exercise. Write a DMP for your next master thesis. If you have PhD students or master students that you are either reviewing or supporting, ask them to write a DMP for their master or PhD project, just as an exercise to get into the mood and into the habit of thinking about the data upfront. I showed this already this morning, so that we have an example that we filled out with imaginary data, imaginary text about an imaginary project with imaginary data. This was already in the slides this morning, so you can go through it and have a look. We might actually consider updating some of the information after a couple of years. I think this is from 2021. But most of the basics of the basic building blocks are still the same. And I still have about 6-7 minutes, which I would like to use to show you very shortly, or talk about very shortly, about how we as a GFBio association offer a data management planning service, so support with writing DMPs for biodiversity, ecology, environmental science inside the NFDI for Biodiversity Network. So this service already runs since 2016-17, I think. And we've made a few updates. It's tailored towards biodiversity very strongly, but again, we've done also work together with some social science and biodiversity combinations. So let me share another screen. Okay, so the URLs are all in the presentation, so you can go there on your own. It's also linked on our NFDI for Biodiversity service website, so you don't have to copy paste anything. And I'm just going to give you a few key points on this, not the complete shebang, in the hopes that Jimena can do this with you step by step in the next couple of days. So what is important to know about DMP support service? Step one, and I already said this 3 times, I know it's tailored towards biodiversity, ecology, environmental science, but generic enough. So if you're unsure, either write us an email and ask, tell us what you're about to do, well, what you need the DMP for. We can probably estimate whether this is a good starting point or not. Second scenario is you just go there and you try it out on your own and see if that this helps you or not. Why it's so easy to try it out? Because we don't have any kind of login requirements from the get-go. This means you can go and as you see right now, I'm not signed in, but I can still start the tool and answer the questions that are there. And the questions are the same topics that I already discussed this morning and a couple of minutes ago. So I'm not going to go question by question, by no means. I'm just going to put in some information because I want to show you something on the very last page, which will not be allowed to see at the moment if I don't put in some information. And of course, the point of contact is me with an imaginary email. And so basically what you're doing here, you're answering the questionnaire about the DMP. I think it's about between 25 and 30 questions. So what am I doing with the data? What kind of data? How much of it? Because of the time constraints I have today, and I'm very sorry about this, I'm not going tab by tab. You can have a look at this. And as I said, hopefully Jimena will show you really the details and you can do your first DMP with us. But what I would like to emphasize is so far I haven't logged in. I have filled out my questions, let's say, for the sake of this example. And now I have the following options. I can export what I already put in directly as a PDF. So this will automatically generate a PDF which has all the questions with all your answers. That's not formatted so it's formatted, but it's not very appealing because it's just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. It says it's automatically generated by this tool. So that the DFG also knows we haven't reviewed this or supported this with specific consultancy. Right. You can decide to log in right now and save your DMP in the system, review it at a later stage, make changes, and then export it. Or here comes the Non Plus Ultra, which is free of charge, is you can request support with us. So basically what will happen here, if you say, this is my email address, this is my message, if you're already logged in, your data is there, so you just type a small message to the DMP officer, so basically to my colleague Jimena, and this will generate a ticket in our help desk system. All the answers will be saved in the backend and will be available through the ticketing system. And then Jimena will basically have a look at your answers. She will prepare a much better structured draft, which she will include some text building blocks in there. So she's going to make a suggestion of how this DMP can be actually made much better. And then she's going to send it back to you and say, how do you feel about this? This is our suggestion about archiving the data. This is our suggestion about publishing the data. And if some important information is missing, she'll start asking questions. So what is the volume of your data? Are you producing any other data types? Because you only listed one, but you mentioned many different methods. So how is that going to be handled? You didn't specify when your data is going to be published. How do you want to handle this? And so on and so on and so forth. So it's a little bit of human-centered back and forth on how to make this DMP much better. And when both parties are happy with it, you get a PDF, which is, let's say, not question answer anymore, but it's similar to this model DMP that you can have a look online with your own content. So it's going to be well-structured text that describes how you're going to do the data management in your project. And it's going to say, yes, it's been supported by GFBio, NFDI for biodiversity, but it will not say anymore that it's been automatically generated because it's not. It's gotten a lot of love and attention from you and from us. And with that, I would like to close the presentation part